Okay, good morning again for our Symposium 2020, a year without public space, reflections and outlooks. So yesterday we had a quite inspiring day with 5 sessions. And now we are setting off for the second day of discussions. Particularly this day is devoted to the topic of cities and health, of course related to the pandemic and different aspects of that relationship. This session will be moderated by Kai Gu. Kai Gu is at the University of Auckland, and he's a professor there, and after working in various other universities before. I know Kai Gu because he's the Secretary General or was the Secretary General of the International Seminar on Urban Form, ISUF, and very instrumental for urban research, particularly using the methodology of urban morphology, and has done very substantial work in that field. And this particular session is basically, we thought it might be nice to have one session that is tying basically the relationship between research and then design in creating sustainable and healthy cities. As you will see, we have people more from research and more from practice, and people that basically join both together. I also want to mention that the speakers today are all affiliated, part of our WUN project, Worldwide Universities Network, that has also funded our collaboration and also the symposium. And yesterday we had the executive director of WUN also in one of our sessions. Now, without further ado, I want to pass the word to Kai Gu, who will then lead through this morning session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Hendrik. Good morning and good afternoon for the colleagues from Auckland. Basically, I'd like to welcome colleagues to the session, Role of Research and Design, Creating Sustainable and Healthy Cities. We have 3 speakers in the session, and we have our 20 minutes for presentations and discussions. So each speaker could, have about 20-25 minutes to go through the research information, and then begin the discussion and questions. I think we have lost time. There's no need to rush through. And we have a small group, so we have a lot of opportunity to explore things together. The first speaker is Dr. Lee Beatty. Lee is a practicing urban designer and urban planner with over 25 years professional experience. He has qualifications in urban planning, urban design, and environmental science. Lee is currently the deputy head of the School of Architecture and Planning and the director of the Master of Urban Design program. He specialized in urban design, urban planning policy implementation and evaluation, growth management, and housing issues. Lee's research interest includes urban design and urban planning policy development, implementation, and evaluation. He is currently involved in a number of research projects considering a range of urban design implementation issues, including the role that master planning urban design panel play, ensuring urban design quality. Lee is actively involved in urban design planning professions in New Zealand. He's a rotating chair of Auckland Council's Urban Design Panel and Auckland Council Queenstown Lake Independent Planning Hearing Commissioner, Secretary of the Urban Design Forum, and a member of Salmon Resource Management Act 1991 editorial board. So Lee has extensive research and practical experience. So welcome, Lee, to our session, and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kai. I'll just share the screen with the presentation I'm going to do. And thank you very much, and a warm welcome to everyone. It's afternoon here in Auckland, and if it's evening or morning, wherever you are in the world, yeah, it's great to have you here. And I have to say that I'd just like to build on some of the things that we've had throughout the conference so far, which has been very interesting and stimulating discussions. And I just want to reinforce what Hendrik said about the previous 5 sessions. I found them very, very interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for the time to speak today. And I'm sort of going to talk about life from a practice point of view here in Auckland and New Zealand, and picking up what Hendrik sort of talked about at the beginning of this session, is talking about how do we bridge those issues between academia and practice, which I do in most of my life. As I said, I'm an urban planner and urban designer, and I'd like to talk about what COVID has done for us here in Auckland and New Zealand, and then also talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities that this can bring. And what I would sort of, my fundamental thesis of this whole presentation is that I hope we don't return to the normal. When we return to what we had, we use this as an opportunity to actually stimulate things and change things and make things better, and actually deliver on some of the things that we've talked about over the years, for many years, especially in the New Zealand, Australian and other types of contexts. So as I say, I've sort of been asked to look at that, about what COVID has meant for us. And as I've said, I think we've all been thinking about that globally, just not as part of this symposium, but globally, we've all been thinking of that. And there's been so many different things, and there's been so many really interesting discussions. And I think it's really interesting also to look at the different responses and that we've seen around the world. And I'll talk a little bit about New Zealand's response in a moment, but just how those had impact on people in different ways and different responses that we've seen. As you may have known, New Zealand had New Zealand's government, because New Zealand's a very small country. It's predominantly 2 islands, and there's about 5.3 million people live in New Zealand. And we only have one government. We don't have states. We just have the central government and we have local government. And so it's a lot easier to do things for a central government point of view. And there's just one House of Parliament. There isn't a Senate or anything like that as well. So the New Zealand government made the decision to go hard and go fast, because fundamentally it was concerned about the impact it would have on our health service. Because if we stayed as we were, we would track like Italy, and our health service would have collapsed. So the government made the decision to go hard and fast very, very quickly, and we entered into a 6-week lockdown period, which basically meant you couldn't leave your home unless you were in a central service. And an essential service meant, you know, you were running the power plant or you were doing something like that. You're only allowed to go to the supermarket, and that became the big day out, was a trip to the supermarket, and then you had to line up and socially distance and all sorts of things. And you're allowed to do exercise in your local community, and there was a lot of discussion about what local meant, but it mostly meant within about 5 kilometres of your house. So you could go for a walk and you go for a bike ride. And there's our Prime Minister, who's got a lot of kudos for what she's done. And I think, just as our colleague Diane Brand was talking about in the first session yesterday, we actually had graduation last week where we had 5,000 people in a hall graduate, in one of our big event centres graduating. And life, in many ways, has returned back to normal for us, except, of course, there's no overseas travel. And I'll pick up that as we go along. But it did have a fundamental impact of our lives. And I think, as other speakers have picked up, there's been those social and economic implications that those have had. And what sort of concerns us in New Zealand is that in many ways it's becoming like a 2-step society now, that people have sort of done okay out of this, and then a lot of the more on the slower social and economic groups have not done very well out of this. And of course, then there's the growing acknowledgement of the social health impacts and mental health issues this has also created. And in my hometown, Auckland, this is where I'm from originally as well, we went for a regional lockdown. We tried that regional approach, and in Auckland, we did go for a regional lockdown. We went for another version of that to stop a small outbreak that took place in July this year. So that put an extra added pressure on my hometown and my province, opposed to the rest of the country. There's some really interesting things I'm sure we all learned about COVID. We all learned how to use Zoom, which I found very difficult to teach urban design over Zoom, and I'm sure other people have done that, but we all learned that. We also had our cats and our dogs. There's my cat there who, what's the right word, came in lots of Zoom conversations and Zoom teaching sessions. My little Burmese kept meowing and stuff like that. I'm sure we all had that. But I'd also like to talk about, seriously, is some of the positive things that did come out of this, putting aside all those negative things that others have really picked up, and I don't want to spend time on that, is that I think one of the really positive things that did come out of this from a urban design point of view was, and a planning and architectural point of view, was people reclaimed their streets and their parks. And There's the second picture down is my local high street. I'm quite lucky. I live in an inner city suburb in Auckland. It's a very unique suburb. It's heritage, so it's not very well, not intensified. But there was no cars. And just as we said in the previous picture, I showed you a picture of a motorway with nothing in it. And that's what happened in lockdown. Basically, our traffic just dropped. You really couldn't move around the city. If you did, the police would say, "What are you doing?" type of thing. So we were forced to, stay at home, as I say, but we could reclaim the streets. There was no traffic. And the park, the last picture is my local park in Cox's Bay, not far from my house. And you'd go down there during lockdown periods and it was just full of people, just walking their dogs, doing their things. And I thought that was a really, really powerful thing about how people could reclaim their streets and parks. There was no traffic. People were on them exercising. You didn't worry about looking for the cars coming with you. And we saw lots of people walking the streets all the time just to get out, get out, socially distancing, of course, riding their bikes. And we saw a fundamental increase in bike sales, push bike sales. In fact, there's still a waiting list to buy a push bike in New Zealand now. You just can't really go in to buy a shop one now. It's just fundamental growth in those types of things, which I thought were really positive things that we could look at. Then COVID came to, well, the first phase came to an end, and slight bit of a blip for the regional phase that impacted on Auckland came to an end, and then the traffic came back. And the other thing we really noticed with COVID was when all the traffic disappeared, how much our air quality improved. I remember going up on one of our local volcanoes, Mount Eden, and the crystal clear views that you could see from there without all the air pollution that we would normally have. That came back, which was really, really frustrating, is that the traffic came back, and it hasn't come back as much as pre-COVID, but it's still come back quite significantly, and you can really start to see that in the last sort of month or so. It's really, really impacting in that sort of space, which is a sort of a downer thing. So I would argue that we really had an opportunity here, and we do have an opportunity here to really work on these ideas of delivering these ideas of sustainable, resilient, livable communities. The idea of returning to the local, the idea of actually creating these things that we've been talking about for a long period of time. And that's what I sort of say there. We've talked about these sort of things, and I'll give some examples in a moment. We've talked about, from an urban planning strategic point of view, that we need to intensify, we need to reduce travel demand, we need to encourage livable, walkable communities, because we know the health benefits, we know all these sort of things, and others throughout the symposium have been talking about that. And it creates that sense of resilience. And I know there's been some talk through many channels, and there was some yesterday as well, about density. And I don't think that's the case. I think that's a management issue. Look at Taiwan. And I should say, one of my other roles is I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Taipei. And that's one of the really downsides about COVID, actually, is I've not been able to travel there and engage with that space. And maybe, hopefully, we might be able to create some relationship between us. But look at what's happened in Taiwan in terms of the way they've dealt with it. So I don't think this argument that density is dead I just don't buy into that type of stuff. And I just wanted to say that in a New Zealand, Auckland context, we've been talking about growth management. We've been talking about creating these ideas of more transit-oriented developments, noting that transit-oriented developments are about employment, they're about all the amenities and everything that goes with them, and just not about housing. And stopping urban sprawl and all those types of things for great periods of time throughout Auckland's recent history, especially over the last 50 years, going right back. And unfortunately, these images are really a bit small, but if you could actually put them together, you could see how our growth management and ideas of growth for 50 years at the periphery sort of disappear in about 12 to 15 years. 50 years worth of growth disappears because we've predominantly gone for those peripheral growth and all those types of things. And then at the same time, sitting with that has been a huge investment in interregional travel with motorways and such like that, instead of actually reducing that investment into more livable, resilient type of communities. And so while I'm talking about this from an Auckland point of view, and there's a picture from my hometown there, looking up across the city, the university's just down in the right-hand corner down there. I'd also argue a lot of these things impact a part of lots other parts of New Zealand as well. And the bottom picture there, that's where I do a lot of private work in my other life, where that's Queenstown. And you may have heard of Queenstown. It's probably New Zealand's premier tourist place in New Zealand. And that's another really interesting thing about how COVID has impacted on our tourist industry, which was a very big, important thing. And how the whole tourist industry in New Zealand has to re-pivot away from international tourists back to local tourists, and what that's meant in terms of employment and such like, and then coming back to that point about the winners and losers out of COVID. But what I'd really like to say is I think the worst thing we could do is return to that just to return back to what we've been doing. And I would argue that as urban designers, urban planners, architects, and anyone involved in this thing, and also as we were discussing yesterday, I think it does involve the anthropologists, it does involve the sociologists, it involves all those people involved in urban space to take some leadership in that. But that does involve us making some hard decisions about how we do this. I mean, there's a lot of investment goes into regional travel and constructing motorways and big infrastructure projects and such like that, and how we make those invested interests and how we deal with that sort of stuff. The other thing I think it's also brought home is how unresilient some of the parts of our system were. And I think that's the point about where the government got to. If it didn't go hard and didn't go fast, I think our system would have collapsed. And it just shows you the unresilience in the system. And again, coming back to my proposition that we need to have something different and think about the way we're constructing urban form. So I know we've talked about this and others have talked about this, about affordable housing. I mean, the interesting thing is that our homeless problem disappeared over COVID because all people couldn't be homeless. We put them in places, but then when COVID ended, they went back to being homeless. And it just shows there's something fundamentally wrong going on here. And we talked about social insecurity. We've also talked about food security as well. Others have talked about that as well. You know, how we allow, and when we talk about peripheral growth, how we allow residential development to take place in some of our most productive soils, especially in the Auckland context. If you go to the periphery of our city, it's got some very productive soils, yet we've allowed that to convert over to housing in the name of short-run economic benefits or housing issues instead of looking at those long-run costs, which, I mean, we did see through COVID, food production kept going, and that's actually what's in many ways has saved the New Zealand economy, because we do export a lot of food and stuff out of the country, which has all continued to continue on and kept the country going. And I've talked about this, many urban planning policies that we've had in New Zealand, and I think in other spaces around the world, have talked long and hard about livability, resilience. And apart from a few limited examples, I think we've predominantly failed to deliver on those things. You know, and as I say, if I went back to put those pictures of maps I put up before about our growth management strategies, you can really see how that's not really played out the way we wanted it to play out. And that's had a huge impact, I think, you know, and I think we're also reaching the point as well, realizing the cost of this is just cost prohibitive to keep doing this. So I think the challenge for us is to look at new urban forms, take the positive things about people reclaiming these streets and look at what we can do this in favor of this idea of returning people back to livable and walkable communities. And that will take fundamental changes in normative behaviour and actions of people, you know, going from setting the goal and actually delivering on those sort of goals. And it would also go through and actually defining what we really think that actually means. And I think that's a conversation we haven't had very, very well. And I think this is a real opportunity for us to have that conversation and have the evidence to justify it. And I also think we haven't done a very good job as a profession, and I put my hand up for this as a professional as well, of us selling to the general community about the benefits of transferring across from different types of housing typologies and options into different, more resilient forms. Because we still have a preference for standalone housing. That is slowly changing. 47% of all new building applications in the city are for apartment or style buildings, but a lot of those building applications haven't actually been converted into developments on the ground. But I think there is a mindset that we have to do this, and this is an opportunity again for us to show leadership in this space, to try and engage in that, both at the professional level and also at the academic level to do that. There are a lot of challenges to do this, and when we do this, we need to think more effectively about how we use open space, because in New Zealand we haven't used open space effectively. We've just had this sort of rules that you have to have so much of it without thinking about what its form and function is. And I think that's another really interesting thing that's come out of this, is an opportunity for us to reevaluate how we use open space. Instead of just having these green spaces, let's make them more active, more usable spaces for people to do. There's a lot of concern about this if we do transfer and change different types of topological responses. And I mean, that's the really interesting thing. You know, you go to Hong Kong and what I'm talking about here is just not an issue. We're talking hyperdensity, opposed to, you wouldn't even think about this sort of thing. It's just a different type of discussion. But as I say, I don't think we've done very good at explaining to the average Aucklander or New Zealander the benefits that they can get from trading off, you know, long travel times and commutes and traffic. My moderator was a little bit, was coming, caught up in traffic today on its way into town, highlighting that point of where we wouldn't have those types of things. So I think we've got to also acknowledge that these transitions will have costs, and a lot of infrastructure costs and those types of things. And we need to have a serious discussion about where those costs and benefits lie and how we ensure that those don't actually impact on affordability issues. Because at the moment, some of the biggest costs in terms of housing affordability is just not land supply, it's actually the cost of infrastructure provision and catching up from those types of underinvestment in the past. So there's a really interesting question about who pays for all this sort of stuff as well. So that's, for me, in New Zealand strikes a really strong need for the role of the state to have a stronger role. We've just recently had an election where, in the first time in our electoral system, which we changed about 25 years ago, which predominantly prevents one party from controlling parliament. It's designed to have coalition governments. We've actually now have a situation where the Prime Minister's party can rule outright without any coalition. And that's the first time it's ever happened in our political system. And she signalled this, that there is a role for more rise for the state. And I think that's really, really important when we look at state intervention and how we can go about that, especially to ensure those things of housing affordability. But as a practitioner, still ensuring that we do the right sort of quality without making generic housing that doesn't have a sense of any vernacular or of any sense of place, which I think is really, really important when we talk about urban form and open space. So we need to think about those types of things. And we also, as I say, coming back to the idea of creating those resilient, sustainable communities. So opposed to the thing on the right, which is on the left there, sorry, which was one of my favorite pictures of a supermarket in a town centre, was just appalling. Moving our way through to more sort of sustainable and more resilient forms. And I have to say, I have taken an example out of Sweden there. That's Hammarby, where I've taken that picture. And of course, there's our more transit-orientated types of things with transit. And in our defence, we are spending a lot more money on creating rail systems, like I've shown down the bottom there. So I think what I'd just like to say is, in the little 5 minutes I've got left, is I think it's an opportunity for us to change the narrative, both in practice and we are in academia, but also in practice and with the community, and get all these people involved to deliver on what we've promised about these livable, sustainable communities. We've talked about growth management around towns, centres, corridors, all that sort of stuff. Deliver on that and start to get back to work at the local level and engage with local communities to ensure that happens. Because the worst thing I think could happen, in my opinion, is that we just return to the status quo. We just go back to the way we were. We favour economic growth to get the economy moving. And there's a lot of emphasis about that. We've talked about some people have not done so well at this. We need more jobs, and unemployment has increased. How do we get that doing? The government's looking at legislation to fast-tracking infrastructure projects without what I would argue, without a real consideration about what are those benefits of those infrastructure projects and what are the long run costs of those things. But I think those are sort of things we need to really have that discussion about. Instead of just returning to normal, let's sit down and say, what type of urban form do we really, really want? And I think that's what we need to do, show some leadership, capture that narrative, just not in the spaces that we're talking about amongst here, which is fantastic, but also in practice with our communities. And trying to do that and trying to, instead of returning to the normal, return to something that would actually be a better outcome for us all. And I think my 15 minutes are up now, so I think I'll stop. And I'm quite happy to answer any questions now or at the end, but I just want to thank the opportunity to speak today. And as I say, I think it's an opportunity for us all to grab that narrative and just really engage and see if we can create something better than what we've got presently at the moment. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, Lee. It's a very comprehensive review of New Zealand experience of COVID, especially from a planning perspective. I'm thinking whether we want to take some quick questions before we move on to the next speaker. What do you think, Hendrik?
Usually we always have a round table at the end.
Okay, sure, that's good. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, that's fine. Okay, our next speaker is Professor Jason Gilland. Jason is Director of Urban Development Program, a full professor in Department of Geography at Western University. Dr. Gilland is an award-winning teacher and researcher who is known internationally for his research on urban planning, public health issues. In 2020, he was named the Children's Health Foundation 2019 Scientist of the Year Award for his work identifying and overcoming barriers to children's physical activity. From 2012 to 2014, he held the title of Faculty Scholar at Western for sustained excellence in all scholar activities. In 2012, he was honored with the ESRI Canada Awards for excellence in GIS, for innovation in the field of geographical information systems, for his work applying GIS for health. In 2009, he was recognized with prestigious awards from the Canadian Association of Geographers for significant research achievement by an early career scholar for his contribution to research on children in the city. He is multi-year winner of the Western University Student Council Teaching Excellence Awards. His current research examines the relationship between modern planning and development practices and the rise of children's health and quality of life issues such as healthy eating, physical inactivity, obesity, vaping injury, mental health, and sleep. His work is funded by organizations such as Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Canadian Cancer Society, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, and various other governmental agencies and foundations. He has published over 150 articles, chapters, reviews, reports, which have appeared in leading international venues such as the American Journal of Public Health, Health and Place, and Annals of Association of American Geographers. Oh, that's very impressive achievement. Jason, I hand over to you. So you have about 15-20 minutes to introduce your work.
All right, thank you very much, Kai, for that introduction. Hopefully I have time left. Can everyone see my title slide? I hope everyone, okay, perfectly. Yes. All right, so as you can see that my title is The Public Realm During COVID-19, and my goal is to explore some local responses from Canada and Canadian cities and suggest some next steps. And I want to thank Hendrik and his team for inviting me to speak, and of course, my old friend Kai for moderating. And it's nice to see everyone. Before I get too far, I also want to thank my team in the Human Environments Analysis Lab, the HEAL. That's an interdisciplinary research and training facility based at Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. And our mission is to develop and connect highly skilled researchers to create, disseminate, and mobilize knowledge for making healthy, thriving communities. And so a key feature of the HEAL is that we strive to amplify our community impact by regularly collaborating with key policymakers, decision makers, and stakeholder groups, including public health officials, city planners, and community organizations. So speaking of cross-sector collaborations, I also want to acknowledge that my presentation today is inspired by a commentary that I co-wrote with my two members of the HEAL team, including my grad student, AJ Ray, who just started his PhD, and my longtime collaborator, John Fleming, who has been a chief planner for over 30 years in Canada, and recently retired from serving as the chief planner in London, Ontario, and is now a senior research associate in the lab. So what do we mean by the public realm? The public realm consists of spaces that are publicly accessible, sidewalks, paths, bike paths, roads, parks, plazas, forests, and water bodies. These spaces vary in their role, function, and ownership to form a continuum of places between buildings. They also contribute to creating a sense of place, linking to many opportunity structures for health and well-being. A wide range of health behaviors and health outcomes are directly supported or impeded by the level of access to and the quality of the public realm. For example, accessibility to local parks and recreation spaces, especially green spaces such as this one in Westmount, Quebec. They are critical for supporting a variety of physical activities, but they are also often provide green spaces which support mental health and emotional well-being, and they also provide spaces for people to gather and build social connections and social cohesion. Of course, parks aren't the only health promoting feature of the public realm, as lots of our research has shown that features of the built environment such as sidewalks and bike paths and street network connectivity can also support active modes of travel such as walking and biking. These public spaces are well recognized as part of the fundamental infrastructure in creating healthy, safe, and thriving communities. But as we all know, earlier this year, COVID-19 upended traditional daily norms around the world. The term unprecedented times has become a bit of a cliche. Probably the most popular phrase we've heard this year, second only to, "I can't hear you, you're on mute." In the province of Ontario, Canada, where I live, the so-called social distancing measures were introduced in March, with the government closing public parks, playgrounds, and recreation centers, and urging people to just stay home. But before too long, many felt the need to escape the confines of their own residence and elected to walk, bike, and/or roll around their neighborhood to experience the public spaces of their own community. Unfortunately, in many communities, the public realm is too small to accommodate this increase in demand for walking and cycling, leading to many local governments restricting access to public spaces, as seen in the last photo, or finding temporary or permanent ways to create more space, such as this shared space for pedestrians and cyclists in my hometown of London, Ontario. This graph shows how the pandemic played out in Ontario. Ontario is the largest province in Canada with almost 15 million people, or about 40% of the Canadian population. The provincial government acted quickly with a state of emergency in March. You can see that first line there. We didn't have a lot of cases, but it forced the closure of a lot of public facilities such as parks, playgrounds, and recreation centers. Unfortunately, as cases rose, many retail businesses also closed, especially those small, independently owned restaurants and bars which could not pivot to takeout, delivery, or pickup. Rates began to fall in early May, and on May 19th in Ontario, we went into a stage 1 reopening, which allowed smaller gatherings of 5 or less and loosened some restrictions on some indoor businesses. Some of those closed businesses reopened, especially outdoor businesses and bars and restaurants with patios. And between May and September, our warm summer months in Ontario, yes, we do get summer in Canada, it looked like we were flattening the curve, and restrictions on size of gatherings and indoor activities got looser and looser. So I now want to turn to an exploration of some of the early local responses. In our early attempt to understand responses to COVID-19 in cities around the world, we developed and deployed a conceptual mapping of the response type and theoretical underpinning of these actions, as shown in this figure. And this is modified from our article that was published in Cities and Health a few months ago. We then applied this preliminary model to test a new framing of local government action in response to a rapidly emerging and challenging policy issue, i.e. COVID-19. And we surmised that local communities acted on the public realm in one of 3 ways. First, they can restrict behavior in the public realm through lockdowns, curfews, and fines. For example, early in the pandemic, most Canadian cities closed access to children's playgrounds, as seen in this photo at the top right from the city of Sudbury in Northern Ontario. Also, the press made it known that in some cities like Ottawa and Toronto, that they were using their police forces to hand out warnings and tickets and fines when they came upon people who were violating rules around social distancing. Number 2, cities can invest in new or redesigned infrastructure, such as reconfigured open spaces, widened sidewalks, or protected bike lanes to help people maintain physical distancing. For example, the photo on the top from Vancouver shows a partial road closure, which was used to create a temporary cycle path during the pandemic. And many cities in North America have done this. The photo at the bottom shows a pop-up bike lane in Brampton, Ontario. With vehicular traffic down by 33%, the city used this as a demonstration project for a permanent bike lane that they had already planned for years in the future. So many cities, Toronto included, used the pandemic as an opportunity to speed up the installation of permanent cycle paths, often years ahead of schedule. Number 3, cities can educate those in the public realm. For example, through signage and non-punitive encouragement of physical distancing restrictions. For example, this top sign, this beach safety sign, is from my local beach in Port Stanley, Ontario on Lake Erie, just south of London. And it reminded everyone to stay home if you're sick, practice distancing, and don't group up larger than 10 people. At bottom, we have an image of the social distancing circles that were painted in Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto to educate people about how to enjoy the park while keeping those safe distances. And this park was infamous for having large crowds of young people violate social distancing rules. So we suggest that these actions, restrict, invest, educate, are linked to each other via common theories and fields that make up the study of cities. And we use these various theories to help explain how actions interconnect to shape individual behavior in the public realm. Restriction and education actions are informed by regulation theory, which identifies government as an agent that places boundaries on the possibilities available in the public realm. These actions combine to promote and/or coerce desired behaviors. Restriction and investment actions are informed by rational choice theory, which identifies government as a passive entity that creates a set of logical choices that nudge individuals towards desired behaviors. And investment and education actions are informed by communicative planning theory, which suggests that governments signal desired behaviors through principled communication in direct and indirect formats. So our conceptual map provides a frame for understanding the wide range of actions that have been undertaken in response to the pandemic. These actions could be influenced by different structural or political or socioeconomic and cultural factors. However, the wide range of variation we observed among cities in our own province of Ontario leads us to believe that the responses to the pandemic depend just as much, if not more, on local conditions rather than those national factors. So now I ask the question, where do we go from here? As a kind of call to action for researchers, policymakers, and decision makers. I argue that cities that adopt more forward-looking and permanent changes to their public realm now will likely be more resilient to future pandemics. So in Ontario, here's our situation now. All our students went back to school in September. Not the universities, most universities stayed home and are doing online, but the elementary and high school students are back, and our numbers are soaring. So much for flattening the curve. One of the most critical issues we need to think about is how we move during COVID and in the post-COVID city. Investments in cycling infrastructure have certainly been a positive side benefit of this pandemic. People are biking now more than ever before, and that's good for one's own health, as well as for the health of the environment. I think we need to research to properly evaluate the impact of these investments. We need experimental and longitudinal studies. We also need to continue to educate people about multiple benefits of active transportation. We also need to educate drivers not to park in bike lanes, which happens often in my city, as you can see here on the left. But while biking is booming, public transit is suffering. Ridership has dropped enormously in most cities due to fewer people commuting to work and the paranoia of contracting COVID in tightly packed buses and subway cars. In Toronto, bus ridership numbers have not dropped to the same degree as subway ridership. And that points to equity issues and socioeconomic disparities in the city around who gets to work from home and who can afford alternative means of transport. So there is really a critical immediate need for new research around sustainable and just transportation. And it must be interdisciplinary, involving engineers, planners, public health professionals, and social scientists of all stripes. And this research should be undertaken with an equity lens. The pandemic has highlighted the fact that in many cities, there are neighborhoods which have a critical lack of public amenities, such as public parks, and that in turn disadvantages residents of those neighborhoods from a public health perspective. COVID-19 has also reminded us that social distancing is for the privileged. Homeless people are particularly vulnerable. As the pandemic continues, the economic crisis will also grow, and rising unemployment rates will also make even more people vulnerable. Therefore, we not only need to invest in more parks and green space for all, but governments also need to invest in affordable housing. Additionally, more research needs to be undertaken on the accessibility and quality of parks and recreation spaces. and to educate the population on opportunities that exist year-round, since winter is coming. Main streets are iconic symbols of urban life, vitality, and belonging, where we go to work, shop, eat, and play. Unfortunately, Canada's main streets have been really hit hard by COVID. Many small businesses have already closed, and many more won't make it through the year. In one of our ongoing projects in my lab called Fresher, which stands for Food, Retail, Environment Study for Health and Economic Resiliency, we estimate that between 5 and 10% of food retail businesses in Ontario have likely permanently closed due to the pandemic, and an even larger proportion of employees in the industry have lost their jobs. Some cities, such as Guelph, Ontario, shown on the left, got on the board really quickly and closed off sections of major streets in their downtowns so that businesses could open outdoor patios to stay open through the summer. But not all businesses can take place outdoors. And with winter coming, we need more creative solutions. We need investment, but we also need multidisciplinary, rapid response research to come up with solutions on how to keep small, independent businesses open and our main streets thriving. Finally, we need more cross-sector collaborations. Like all wicked problems, the problems caused by that pandemic are too big for simple, monodisciplinary solutions. Researchers need to pivot. We can't just sit back and wait for this to be over so we can get back to our old pre-COVID projects. We can't keep telling ourselves, when we get back to normal, when we get back to normal, as the post-COVID era may look a lot different from the pre-COVID times. Indeed, it must look different for the sake of our health and that of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Lots of extremely stimulating information. You will get back to further discuss the ideas you've gone through in the questions and discussion session. Let's move to the third speaker, Kevin Lau. Dr. Kevin Lau is Research Assistant Professor at Institute of Future Cities, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. His primary research interest is on the relationship between the built environment and urban climate, with a particular focus on human thermal comfort in outdoor environment. His research ranges from numerical modeling of urban microclimate to field studies of outdoor thermal comfort, with over 50 articles published in peer-reviewed journals. He's a member of WMO expert network of the Commission for Observation, Infrastructure, Information Systems, and the Commission for Weather, Climate, Water, and Related Environmental Services and Applications. Okay, Kevin, I hand over to you. So you have about 15 minutes, 20 minutes to present your research work.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Let me share the screen first. So do you see my title page? Good, right. All right, thank you. Good morning, and for colleagues in Hong Kong, and good day for partners from elsewhere. I'm Kevin Lau from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So I'm going to talk about a little bit different from what me and Jason discussed, just to the ongoing work for our development of the Healthy Community Assessment tool for promoting active lifestyle in Hong Kong. And then we have done quite a bit of pilot studies in Hong Kong. So here are some results and the introduction to the project. And we all know that physical activity is important to our health and well-being, especially for vulnerable groups, people with chronic diseases. So because physical activity can increase the intrinsic capacity to battle these chronic diseases. And then there's been a lot of studies about the importance of physical activities, and in the WHO document for more active people for a healthier work, stating that there are 1 to 3% of the expenditure in national health care expenses due to physical inactivity. So it is important to enhance our physical activity of citizens so that to relieve the burden of the healthcare system. And there are a number of factors or affecting the physical activity, and in turn, the physical activity also contribute to a number of sustainable development goals, which we've been focusing for in the last few years. And the built environment play a very important role to physical activity because it provides the opportunities for people to exercise or to conduct like any form of physical activities. And it is the factors or the aspect of built environment include like recreational resources like parks, walking trails, all these opportunities for exercising or physical activities. And also the land use characteristics, because the planning of the land use also influence like how people commuting around the neighborhood, how people like how people behave or like use the neighborhood, and also the characteristics of the form of the neighborhood. So for example, like in these two pictures that shows how the street environment, how the infrastructure of the street environment would contribute to a more favorable environment for people to exercise. And then also the social aspects are also important, including the community participation, how the community environment would facilitate the physical activities of these residents in the neighborhood. We've been doing a lot of like literature research, like to investigate how what kind of physicals and also social factors are affecting the physical activity. So, for example, the walkability of the neighborhood, the accessibility to the facilities in the neighborhood, also environmental quality, including the air quality, also the aesthetic nature of the neighborhood. And apart from that, also the street network also determine how people commute around within the neighborhoods. And lastly, the importance of the open spaces, because it is the exact places for people to gather to conduct the physical activities. And on the other hand, the social factors are also important. So for example, social connections, interactions with people, how people participate in the community in different activities or nature of activities in community, and the sense of belongings to the community, people how people are attached to the activity as to the community are also important. And then the personal status, including the socioeconomic factors, the cultural background, and individual behaviors are also determinants of the level of physical activity in the neighborhood. And then there have been a number of toolkits or assessment tools that help the urban designers and also the community members to better understand like how their neighborhood or community is good for physical activity of individuals. So there's two from Canada, from the British Columbia, on how urban planning and design, different areas of planning and design would contribute to a healthier and more sustainable built environment. And then there are particular focuses on the social well-being and then the associated co-benefits in terms of the economy. And then they also pay attention on the small and medium-sized communities, which is the immediate neighborhood of the residents. And in particular, when we look at the social well-being, there are a number of key planning principles which we can make use of to enhance the social well-being of the residents in the communities, including the street connectivities, and then also the active transportation in terms of like cycling, walking, and also other form of transportation. And then the quantity and quality of the green spaces, the perception of safety, and also a number of like social factors, including the placemaking, the community engagement. And then there's also another tool specifically looking at the relationship between the built environment and the active transportation. So this is a more comprehensive tool looking at different aspects of the planning and design, including the density and land use, planning engagement, like infrastructures related to the pedestrian environment, the bicycling environment, also safety, environmental qualities, things like that. But those tools are from a more medium density city. But in Hong Kong, we have extreme high density, a high-rise city with a very compact environment. So what are the important factors? How these factors are different from the Western experience, for example. With a high density living environment, with a large population, over like 7.3 million. And then in terms of the urban population density, there's over like 27,000 persons per square kilometers. And then these create a large burden to the healthcare system. So how we enhance our physical activities become important to relieve like these kind of burden. And then apart from that, our living spaces are very limited. As you can see here in terms of the public rental housing, we have only like 13 meters square meters per person, and just like 20 square meters per person for private housing. So the outdoor spaces become important because like they serve as the extended living spaces for the residents in the neighborhood, especially during times of like, for example, during the hot weather when people are not cannot afford air conditioning in their households. They tend to like spend their time in the outdoor spaces. So the design and the planning of the outdoor spaces become very important. So to accommodate these kind of needs. And because of the high density and the increasing population, and for the strategic planning of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong 2030 plus, there's a specific focus on how we plan for a livable high density city. And then in that, the active design and the sustainable environments are the two important aspects. So how we can make use of the active design to improve our physical activities of citizens and hence health and well-being of individuals through urban and building design, and how we can increase on the provision of open spaces at different spatial level in the district, in the neighborhood, or within like the housing estates, for example. And then also how we can provide a comfortable walking and cycling environment. And apart from the active design, there's also a specific focus looking at the sustainable built environment. So how we can include or enhance the green and blue infrastructure for the new development areas, how we make use of the green building design to form an integral part of the structures of all, not just the new government projects, but also like there's a policy incentive to look at the private development projects as well. And then in terms of the health and well-being of citizens, the Department of Health also have a strategy how we look forward to the 2025 to improve to improve our actions or strategies to prevent and control like the non-communicable diseases in Hong Kong. And in particular, they also look at like the capacity or the intrinsic capacity of individuals to make healthier choices, including like to exercise or to look at the to improve the level of physical activity of individuals in the community. And then there are a number of like principles and approaches, and there's specific emphasis on the evidence-based strategies. So we need to like gather the evidence and also the necessary information of our neighborhood, how like different factors or aspects are related to the level of physical activities of individuals in the community. So the objectives of this project is to develop a healthy community assessment tool paying attention on the physical activity, the active lifestyle for urban designers, for policymakers, or for the community members, and even the general public to better understand like their community, especially in the high density cities. And then these two are also focus on how to support the decision makings in the communities. And of course, like the ultimate goal is to improve or to promote the active lifestyle of urban residents through urban planning and design. So for example, like the provision of open spaces, and then how we can improve the neighborhood environment, or to encourage people to use the specific use of the community environment. And then for our research plan, we're in the beginning stage. We have done the literature review of like about the relationship between level of physical activity or like other health factors to the neighborhood environment. And in the later stage, we will involve different stakeholders to gather their feedback to refine our methodology, and then to also we'll conduct like engagement workshops, seminars to include like a wider spectrum of audience. And then go through the later stage will be the consultation to the community, and at last we will do the field testing. And then we're at the development stage of the pilot tool. So these are the specific or some examples of the neighborhood characteristics which we have some problems in, and then these would prevent people like to conduct a different kind of activities or exercises in the neighborhood. So the pilot version of the tool, looking at 8 domains from destination, from the network of movement or transportation, housing and buildings, open space, the sense of belongings and the community facilities, and at last also the environmental qualities. We make use of a questionnaire base with like some open-ended remarks to record like details of the aspects that we assessed. And then we conduct like the pilot case study in Hong Kong into quite different districts. One is in Sham Shui Po, which is a old urban core characterized by like low-rise and tenement buildings, but it has a very high connectivity because of the dense street network and also a high level of commercial and pedestrian activities. The other study area is a high-rise public housing estate, which is located in the heart of the Kowloon Peninsula, and then it has more open spaces and the community facilities, but at the same time, it is also next to a very mixed land use area. So we're going to talk about like some examples of what we have like looked at in terms of the destinations. So for example, in Sham Shui Po, the old urban core area, because of the dense street network, there's a very limited sitting areas in the neighborhood, in the community. But at the same time, it has very vibrant commercial activities because it has been a hub for different retail industries. And then it doesn't have many opportunities for recreation because of the very cramped environment, and also poor hygienic conditions and high level of pedestrian activities as well. But at the same time, it has been a test point for like some safe walking environment. So we have like looking at different factors which will contribute to the destination aspect in the assessment tool. And then in the other area, the Tong Tau estate, the public housing estates, relatively speaking, it has more open spaces in the community because it's been it has been planted according to standard guidelines, and it's very standardized design because of the public housing. But at the same time, it has kind of deteriorated conditions in the local activities. So for example, there's a wet market, but quite a lot of like vacant shops in the wet market. and also the materials that's been decayed quite significantly. And because of the these areas is a kind of elderly district, for example. It has not many people gather in the neighborhood, and also not many activities occurring in the neighborhood as well. So it comes to the sense of places and belonging in some shape or because of the nature of the buildings, because like these are what we call the Tonglao, the tenement buildings. It has a very significant like cultural history. And also there's a number of like commercial activities, because like, it has been a hub for different kind of retail activities. And then also has been growing number of meeting places for not just the general public, but specifically for the teenagers to gather around. And also like some form of like street arts, you can also find that here. So there's a kind of like very special identity for the district. On the other hand, for the public housing estate, there's because of the nature of the public housing, it has been a district characterized by aging population, because it was a former the Kowloon Wall City is a very cramped area in the past, but it has been transformed into a city park in the local area. And also because of the planning of the public housing estate, it has offered a lot of more communal activities or facilities. And also it's been next to a mixed land use area, which people will make use of these like services or facilities in these mixed land use area. And then in terms of the environmental qualities, in some shape, because of the intensive activities, has been encountering a number of like environmental problems in terms of the air pollution due to heavy traffic, the local refuse collections, and also the noise pollution. And then specifically has been issues about like outdoor thermal comfort because of the lack of ventilation due to the compact urban form. And in contrast, for the public housing estate, it has relatively calm traffic, and also the water board is also separate the public housing estates from the surrounding neighborhood, which kind of like serve as a buffer to the neighborhood nearby. And because of the lack of shading opportunities, there's a number of like covered walkways to improve the pedestrian experience, and also more green spaces in the area. And then in particular, there's also a bridge over the water body, and then it kind of like serves as a recreation places. You can see here in the picture, like people go fishing in the river. And then in terms of the public open spaces, the two districts like shows different kind of public spaces. So for example, in some shape, there's a number of like linear parks along the main road, which actually people make use of these linear parks, not just by the local community, but also like people traveling to these places. On the other hand, in the housing estate, we have a relatively larger open spaces in close proximity to the residential units. So you can see here, people are gathering, like most of them are elderly people, to for example, like playing chess, or they just like chit chat in the area. And also in terms of buildings, specifically looking at the shading opportunities to improve the thermal comfort experience, you can see that in some shape there's like kind of like arcade to provide shading to the footpath. But on the other hand, like because of the lack of like these kind of arcades in the housing estate, there are also covered walkways to improve the walking experience in the neighborhood. So we are now up to the development, the pilot stage of the development of the two we found we know that like neighborhood designs is important to facilitate active lifestyle in the community, and then also the high density living environment, which we need specific attention to look at, like how individual design aspects would impact on the level of physical activity of the residents. And this pilot study, or the pilot stage, looking at 8 major aspects of the neighborhood design, which we will closely look at that and to see like whether we need to include like more aspects with the special regard to active lifestyles. And then according to our experience in the 2 very distinctive neighborhoods, there's a wide range of conditions which we need to consider in developing the tool to cater the necessary conditions. And then we're also looking forward to like including other typical neighborhoods in the high density living environment in Hong Kong, for example, the private development as private estates. And yeah, in the later stage, we'll also conduct the stakeholder engagement. So we're looking forward to the future development of the project as well. So, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. Thank you for your talk. I'm looking at the meeting room. We now have 44 participants. We have 3 questions already for the panelists. So let's begin our roundtable discussion. I'm looking at the first question now. It seems that from all the presenters, COVID-19 requires a team efforts amongst academics and local authorities. My question is, how can researchers engage and respond to the public during a rapid event like COVID-19, where there seems to be a growing skepticism of the effectiveness of academic work amongst the public and local government institutions? Basically, how can we get our research from outside and just another academic journal to the local institutions that actually need it? So this question is from Marsilio. That's you. Do I need to repeat?
Nope.
Yeah.
I can say a few words, and then probably Lee might want to say a few words. I think that was the comments I was trying to make in my last few slides about how we really need cross-sector collaboration among not just academics, so multiple disciplines, but we need to talk with decision makers, policy makers, stakeholder groups, community groups. The last slide that I showed, I didn't actually talk about it, but that was actually my youth advisory council. I have a group of teens that before COVID used to come to the lab and we would talk about issues, and we figured out what issues were important to them and try to tackle those issues. So I think as researchers, if we're more community researchers, we engage with the public. So it's true, a lot of academics will do articles, and when we're done, it goes onto the shelf, and then we move on to something else. But that's not as fulfilling as actually being able to make a difference in your own community or your city. And so I think the key for that is to find out what are the important issues in your community, and then tackle those and work with members of the community to actually tackle those as well. I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
I would say, and I think that comes back to it's almost a structural issue, and again it varies from country to country, so I can't really comment too much more than what I'd see in New Zealand and in Australia, where I have a much more visible presence. It's the structural nature of universities themselves. Someone like myself, and I don't mean this in any wrong way, is a bit of an anomaly. You don't find many urban design academics or planning academics or architectural academics, for that matter, given those are the 3 disciplines I work with in my school, that have an in-depth engagement with practice. And that's to do with the metrics that sit behind your performance as a university professor, if you like. It's all about publications and A-starred journals, and you don't get very much value per se for engaging with practice. In saying that, the New Zealand government has realised that it's probably not a good idea, and there needs to be a more acknowledgement of impact beyond just as Jason said, writing to ourselves, but to writing to engaging and actually having a meaningful discussion with the people in practice, be it which all the built form professions and others. And I think that's sort of what I find is it's a bit of a structural thing. And I think that we need to think about the way our institutions behave to encourage us to engage more willingly with people in practice. And some of us are doing this, like Jason's doing it, myself is doing it, Kai does it, and I'm sure, and I know that Hendrik does it as well, with all the work that his and his crew are doing. But I think it's something structural that needs to be thought about in our university structures.
Thank you, Lee. Kevin, do you have idea that you want to share?
Well, I think I agree with Jason that the involvement of the stakeholders are very important because of our experience also in developing this tool, like working with the, especially with the community members. For example, the members of the district council, that they actually give us quite a lot of experience, which academics may not be able to get through the literature, through our research, because I think the involvement of the stakeholders can provide us very valuable information for us to improve, not just to improve our work, but also help us to implement our research in the real world. I think yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, I was thinking about your tool and you know, obviously you went about it very informed. You looked at other tools and things in Canada and other places, but of course the ratings, the individual weighting that you give to each item really is going to be Hong Kong specific, or it's going to be neighborhood specific, and that's why you're engaging. So it doesn't matter what I've said about the Canadian situation. It matters about what your people in Hong Kong say, or how important is that feature to you. And so you're doing participatory research that's you know, engaging right there. It's great.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also my response to Jérôme in the Q&A session as well, because I think we cannot just rely on the government departments. I think in the past, with our experience for the top-down approach is not as efficient as we expect. So sometimes the bottom-up approach is also important, and that's why the involvement of all these stakeholders give us not just giving us information, but in turn we also offer some insights when they conduct their community work, for example how they can engage the community members, engage the general public to utilize the public spaces. But of course, the design and planning is also rely on the professionals. But hopefully, how our work can influence the upper level decision making. So I think we work in both ways as well.
Thank you, Kevin. I come across a term. It's called action research model. So actually, yeah, it's kind of a conceptual framework idea that's based on partnership between researchers, community, and practitioners. So people want to get into the research and expecting the results that could be useful for both academic community and general public. So that's probably a relevant idea. I'm looking at the second, the question. Thank you for the very diverse and informative presentations about different locations and responses around the world. My question for all panelists is, how do we strike a balance between freedom and control to try and stimulate mass behavioral change?
I don't know. We have three very different countries here, and I've got a neighbor to the south where we have what the results, a really good example of what happens when you don't actually follow the rules or be more ordered, and perhaps they're maybe Lee is from a country that was a little bit more ready and willing to follow government directions. And now Lee probably can walk down his street a little bit more comfortable and have a safe feeling that he's not going to get infected. I'm in Canada, not in the US, but in my buddy, I showed in the graphs. So I think you show the evidence and hope that people still believe in science. And say, you know, your freedoms are very much more restricted when you're in the hospital or when you're dead. There you go.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there was a lot placed on, I mean, when you come from a small country, we've only got 5.3 million people, you can do certain things that you can't do in other places. And there were a lot of, there was some pushback, but I think there's a general feeling amongst New Zealanders that go hard, go fast, suffer the pain. And Jason's completely right. There is no social distancing anymore in New Zealand. As I said, we had a graduation on Thursday with 5,000 people in it, and life is almost back to normal. It's not, we can't travel overseas, but we can do our thing. We just still have to contact trace app. We just have to acknowledge every place we go into. But yeah, I do feel, and I think that's the conscious decision that was made. But I think that's more of a collective thing that you get in a smaller country. I don't know, that's a cultural thing, I would suggest. I don't know, you could see that in Australia. It didn't work as well as it did here, but probably better than it's worked in the US. I look at Victoria, cousins across the ditch in Australia there, where they were locked down for 100 days. That seemed to have worked. So I think there's a general feeling amongst us that it's better to go hard, suffer the pain now, and then not have that second wave and all the problems that I think the US and unfortunately our European colleagues are facing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But on that, just being up Jason, there was a lot of communications by health officials. The Director General of Health, who's the chief bureaucrat in charge of the health department, was front and center every day explaining what it was about, showing graphs that if we didn't do this, we'd be like Italy, the system would collapse, trying to message and show to New Zealanders what the benefits of this were. Otherwise, we would all be stuffed, basically. And I think that was a strong part of the messaging that the Prime Minister and the Director General of Health did.
Yeah, I think we went hard and fast in Canada at first. And then as this dragged on, people, you know, we watch a lot of US television. And, you know, our second wave is twice as high as our first wave. And so I shouldn't brag and say we're all following the rules. There's a small town just south of here that's having a rally this weekend on anti-masking rally. And people are coming from far and wide to, so, you know, there are pockets, so as in my talk, I talked about different approaches of investing, educating, and restricting. And I don't think restricting is really the way we go in the future. It's investment in education. And so I think we have to have education as much as we can and hope that people are smart enough to learn.
Jason, quickly for you, I'm looking at your model, framing local responses, restricting, educating, and investing. There are some cities in the middle of the triangular area, and they're in different spots. You talked about the local specific conditions, and people take things differently, respond differently. So what particular local conditions that really determine the different responses?
Is that a question from someone who might have read the paper? Because I, in the original paper, we included 20 cities from around the world inside the triangle. And, but I decided to take all of those out for this presentation because what really happened was that was original reactions of what we saw. And what I would say is gradually over time, every city probably had an example of every single one. So every city had an example of investing in educating and restricting. So in the paper that was published very quickly after COVID, it was written within the first month or so, it was what we were seeing cities around the world, their original actions, what got into the newspapers. But I would say now, but local conditions, sure. Density, density has a huge difference. So, you know, we have nothing like Hong Kong, but our closest, I guess, is Vancouver and Toronto. And Toronto on the graph wasn't allowed to open up at the same time as the rest of Ontario because of more cases. So some of the solutions were a little bit different. London, Ontario, where I live, it's a conservative city and it's always slow. It's always very proud of its AAA Moody's rating of a very good financial city. It's because they don't spend any money on anything. So they'll wait for another city to do permanent. So the culture, the conservative culture about not spending, not investing in the built form, comes to play in our town. So I think there's a lot of that. There's the conservative culture or more of a left-leaning culture. And I'm seeing cities that are just 1 hour away, like the very closest next city, may be doing something completely different. They may be, and towns that you see that are more small university towns might be a little bit more creative. Yeah, I could go on.
Oh, thank you, Jason. Anything you want to share, Kevin?
Well, I think like Jason and Lee has been talking about, because they've been doing a lot of work, like especially for this like COVID situation. And then my work is focuses more on the general, or hopefully the return back to normal situation. So yeah, we have quite a lot of insights from them already.
But I wanted to ask you that question, Kevin. So what happens if we don't, how does your whole system change if we don't go back to normal? And that's maybe the scaling, the weighting, what?
Yeah, I think like this is something that we have to determine, because like for instance, we're now in the development stage of the tool. So we haven't decided how we rate the community, for example, because like an overall rating may not be applicable, because the aspect that we consider is sometimes quite contradictory, because like sometimes you have to strike a balance between like the physical environment, also the social dimensions of the community, and as you said, like if we cannot go back to normal, then we have to like take into additional considerations, for example, social distancing, especially in high density cities. So we've been seeing because like the rules for the restrictions for public gathering has been relaxed a little bit, and we started to see like people actually quite a lot of like people going up like on going hiking and like crammed a lot of like places, and the social distancing seems not valid anymore now in the last few weeks. So I think like something that we have to consider, especially for high density city, we actually get very close to each other in the past. But now, if we cannot go back to normal, we have to like exercise social distancing, especially for a longer period of time. Then I think like the urban design we have to take into account this, especially for the use of the outdoor spaces in that sense.
Thank you, Kevin. I think we have several quick questions for Kevin from John and Joanne. Very interesting comparative study, Kevin. Have you come out some qualitative changes in the design of the public realm to encourage active learning? The following question: do you think your proposed assessment tool can build on BEAM plus neighborhoods, or vice versa?
Well, thanks for the question. Thanks, John, for the questions. I think like the BEAM plus neighborhood is actually a very good reference for our tool as well. But there's a little bit different between our tool. I mean, our current pilot version, because as I said, it takes into account not just the physical side, because the BEAM plus neighborhood actually takes into account a number of like physical aspects, like the building, and also like the energy used, the water use, a lot of like physical aspect. But for our tools, like when we take into account both physical and social aspect, then we have to be very careful to strike a balance between them. So for example, like the BEAM plus neighborhood gives an overall composite rating, but for our tool, we are thinking that we're just considering whether this overall score is or can reflect the characteristics of the community, because this assessment tool our proposed assessment tool is not just for evaluation purpose, but more importantly is to inform the community, especially the community members, like the district councillor. As I mentioned, we need to consider also the bottom-up approach. So the local power, the local community can play a very important role in improving the neighborhood design. I think the design of the neighborhood is has to take into account both like the guidelines or the design of the spaces, but on the other hand, the use of the spaces is also important. So I think our tool aims to address both the design perspective, but also how we use the outdoor spaces as well.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. Hendrik, do we have time to ask a final question?
I think we need to probably wrap up because we have only a very short time to prepare for the next session.
Sure.
Maybe we can just kind of wrap up and then move on, because we have only one webinar session.
Yes, sure. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I'd just like to thank all the speakers, Lee, Jason, and Kevin, for your extremely interesting, wonderful presentations. I'd like to thank all the audience for the comments and questions. It has been extremely stimulating, informative. So it's great learning opportunity. It's very nice to meet you all, especially Jason, Kevin, and Hendrik this afternoon. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, let's stop here. Thank you very much.
Maybe we can, Stephanie, maybe you want to announce the next session, and then I also want to thank Kai for moderating, of course, all of you and the attendee for joining. Maybe Stephanie, do you want to just say what's next on our program?
Yeah, sure. So thank you once again. So I just want to give a heads up that in actually 15 minutes, we're going to start another session for the day. Titled Cities and Health, Creating Healthy Neighborhoods. So in this panel, we'll have speakers from Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong, CHK, to talk about more from a public health perspective and how does that integrate with the disciplines of urban design and architecture. So it'll be a very interesting, different perspective. So if you're interested, you can still head to our website to register for the session. And we do actually still have a few sessions coming up today as well, so you can check that out. Yeah, so all from my side.
Thanks to all of you, and maybe see some of you in the next session where we basically continue with more kind of public health.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely to see you all.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.